Everybody, Stephanie Hamilton here answering this week's question. I have chosen the first question. What are the key factors that influenced international action in Libya, and do you agree with this action? So there was so much happening in the Middle East and North Africa during this time that I had to go back and actually reread some news reports and refresh my memory on the specifics around Libya. Though violence had initially erupted in Libya on February 15th, and the UN had previously approved sanctions and an arms embargo, the events that occurred from March 15th through the 17th are what actually led the UN Security Council to approve military intervention. During those 3 days, groups loyal to Gaddafi launched military-style offensives in an effort to regain control of areas in the eastern part of the country that were rebel strongholds. The responsibility to protect doctrine was used as justification for the Security Council's authorization of the use of force, as well as the establishment of a no-fly zone. In an attempt to enforce the no-fly zone on March 19th, a coalition of military forces launched attacks aimed at Libya's air force. NATO took over command of those efforts on March 27th. Because, according to Garwood Gowers, one of the articles that we had to read, quote, Gaddafi made explicit threats against civilians in Benghazi, end quote. And his regime had already been targeting civilians in an effort to end the rebellion. I agree with the initial international action of establishing a no-fly zone and disabling Gaddafi's air force. Where I'm less certain is with regards to NATO's takeover of the operation. NATO's involvement seems to signal a shift away from a humanitarian effort that's protected and can be authorized by the responsibility to protect doctrine. And in fact, Garwood Gowers points out that the first intervention was similar to previous interventions by the UN Security Council and other countries. And so while I think the initial intervention was both warranted and within the UN Security Council's scope of authority, I don't think escalation by NATO was. It's interesting also to note that Resolution 1973 that authorized establishment of the no-fly zone didn't make any reference to the international community's responsibility to protect citizens being harmed by their state. And again, according to Garwood Gowers, it seemed to signal that some of the countries in the UN Security Council were uncomfortable with establishing that kind of legal framework that might require them to act again in the future. And so there you have it. That's my answer.